Today we are going to start the online lectures of microeconomics. This is your first lecture of microeconomics. I am your teacher, Shumaila Zeni. We are going to start the chapter of consumer theory. Before that, we have covered the demand supply, market equilibrium, government restrictions, and all that. So, the topic of concern now is the consumer theory. It means how consumers make choices under income constraints. You recognize that any theory about individual behavior must be an abstraction of reality. We may begin to develop a model to help us understand how consumers will respond to the alternative choices that confront them. A consumer is an individual who purchases goods and services from firms for the purpose of consumption. As a manager of a firm, you are interested not only in who consumes the good, but in who purchases it. So that's why, first of all, we will start from utility because the basic purpose of the consumer is to maximize the utility or the satisfaction. It is the level of satisfaction or pleasure consumer gets from the consumption of consumer goods. It is psychological phenomena and consumers cannot have everything they wish to have, so consumers' choices are limited by their incomes. For example, a 6-month-old baby consumes goods but is not responsible for purchase decisions. If you are employed by a manufacturer of a baby's food, it is the parent's behavior you must understand, not the baby's behavior. By watching the consumer behavior, you must be noted two things: consumer opportunities and consumer preferences. So, the basic question about the utility is how to measure the utility. There are two schools of thought about the utility. They say that number one is cardinal approach and second is ordinal approach. According to the cardinal approach, the utility can be measured into numbers. It means if you are consuming something, you can identify those into the numbers, which is not much realistic. And in ordinal approach, the utility cannot be measured, but only can be preferred. In this case, we discuss the consumer preferences. So, cardinal approach depends on marginal utility approach, and ordinal theory depends on indifference curve approach. And in ordinal approach, we have some assumptions like the consumers are utility maximizers. They always want to maximize the utility or their satisfaction, and consumers prefer more of a good to less of it. If the consumers have two choices, tea and coffee, like X and Y, a consumer would either prefer X to Y or Y to X or would be indifferent between them. The concept related to the utility is the total utility versus marginal utility. The total utility is the consumer gets from the consumption of all of the units of a good. The increment to his utility is marginal utility. The total utility is you are consuming all the goods, so this is called the total utility. And the increment to his utility is marginal utility. Regarding to the concept of marginal utility, there is the concept of law of diminishing marginal utility. According to this concept, the more we get any commodity, the desire to get any more of it will fall. There are law of diminishing marginal utility, and you have to keep in mind these 3 points. Along with increase in use of any commodity, total utility increase at decreasing rate, hence marginal utility decreases. When total utility reaches at maximum, marginal utility becomes zero. And when total utility itself falls, marginal utility becomes negative. So this law is applicable in real life also. Whenever any consumer consumes any good continuously, the desire to get any more of it will fall. But in the start, along with the consumption of any commodity, the total utility will increase. After consuming third or fourth unit of any commodity like ice cream or any good, the total utility will go to decrease. There will be the point when the total utility reaches at maximum, it means the person has no capacity to consume more. So marginal utility becomes zero. If the person will consume after that specific point, he may not feel well after consuming more of the ice cream, so marginal utility becomes negative. This table is showing the behavior of total and marginal utility for ice cream. You can easily see that quantity is given as the quantity is the as the utility is the function of quantity, so you can derive the marginal utility from the total utility. You can see that from the quantity the consumer is consuming from unit 0 to unit 6, the marginal utility is going to fall and total utility is increasing but at decreasing rate due to marginal utility is falling. On the 8th unit, the total utility becomes maximum and marginal utility is zero. By consuming more and more, by 9th and 10th unit of commodity, the total utility will go to fall by itself and marginal utility will become negative. You can draw the diagram of total utility and marginal utility and easily know the phenomena of this. As you see that this is the total utility. On the horizontal axis, you are showing the commodity, quantity, and on the vertical axis, you are talking about total utility. And here on the horizontal axis you are talking about quantity, and on the vertical axis you are taking the marginal utility, and you have drawn the marginal utility from the total utility diagram. So the marginal utility is zero on the marginal utility is zero when you are saying it is about the eighth unit, then it's going to be negative after that on the ninth and 10th unit. Here are some assumptions of diminishing marginal utility, like there is continuous use of the commodity, they must be similar in amount, they must be in suitable amount, taste and attitude must remain same, income must remain same. It means if the person is consuming some commodity, he must consume continuously. Then this assumption will be applicable. Number two, if he is using the one commodity, or he is taking the one glass of water, so he is continuously using the or consuming the one glass of water, means the amount must be similar. He is using the one glass of water, not the half glass of water. They must be in suitable amount. Taste and attitude remain same, means in any case he is drinking the water only, not he is shifting from water to any other drink. And income must remain same. It means his income is not increasing or decreasing, or his preferences is not going to change. His taste is same, his income is same. It means in the same income he is preferring or he is utilizing or consuming the same glass of water in each time. Maybe if his income has been increased, he has been shifted from glass of water to any other drink like Pepsi, Coca-Cola or etc. So these assumptions must be fulfilled for the diminishing marginal utility. Here are some limitations when the law of diminishing marginal utility is not applicable. There are three limitations are used: the knowledge, wealth and money, and third one is drugs and narcotics. In these cases, if the person is getting more of it, the desire to get any more of it will not fall, but it will increase. In case of knowledge, if you are getting knowledge, the desire to get any more of it will increase. In case of money, this phenomena will be applicable, and in case of drugs and narcotics, this will be also applicable. The next approach we are using about the budget constraint, but the first approach which has been ended in this slide of the limitation, this was the marginal utility approach, where the utility we say can be measured into numbers. But next, whenever we talk about the ordinal approach, it means the utility cannot be measured into numbers but only be ordered. For that, we have to know about the phenomena of budget constraint. It means the person has the limited income, and in that limited income, he has to maximize his utility. He wants to maximize his utility in each case. And the feasibility of the consumer's desired consumption bundle depends upon two factors: income and prices. In making decisions, individuals face constraints. These are legal constraints, time constraints, physical constraints, and of course, budget constraint. To maintain our focus on the essentials of microeconomics without indulging into issues beyond the scope of this course, we will examine the role of prices and income play in constraining consumer behavior. Simply, we are saying about the budget constraint restricts consumers' behavior by forcing the consumer to select a bundle of goods that is affordable. If a consumer has only $30 in his or her pocket when reaching the checkout line in the supermarket, the total value of the goods the consumer presents to the cashier cannot exceed $30. More generally, you are talking about two goods X and Y, and they have the value or the prices Px, Py, and income which is represented by M. Let M shows the consumer's income, which can be any amount. By using M instead of the particular value of income, we gain generality in that the theory is valid for a consumer with any income level. We will let Px and Py shows the prices of goods X and Y respectively. Given this notation, the opportunity set may be expressed mathematically as M is equals to Px into X plus Py into Y. In words, the budget set defines the combination of goods X and Y that are affordable for the consumer. The consumer's expenditures on good X plus her or his expenditures on good Y do not exceed the consumer's income. Note that if the consumer spends his or her entire income on the two goods, the equation holds with equality. This relation is called the budget line, and that budget line can be shown in this form. In other words, the budget line defines all the combinations of good X and Y that exactly exhaust the consumer's income. We are taking the example of two goods, films and meals, and student has grant of 50 per week. It means he has the income of 50 rupees and price of meal is 5 and price of film is 10. So the student can consume maximum of 10 meals or 5 films by devoting all of his grant to the consumption of only one of these goods. Alternatively, he can consume some combination of the two goods also. For example, giving up one film a week, saving 10, enables students to buy two additional meals, costing 5 each. This is called trade-off. Trade-off is represented slope of budget constraint. And we have shown this the budget equation. It has the intercept and slope. You can easily know the concept of intercept and slope. As you know, the intercept determined by income divided by appropriate price of the good. And the slope is independent of income determined only by the relative prices. If consumer spends all of his income on meal, it means he is not spending on the films. So it means the film spending will be zero. In this equation, here you can put y is 0 and you can get the intercept of x. If the consumer is spending all his income on y, that is films, it means the x will be 0 and you can easily find out the y intercept. If the consumer spends all his income on x, then y must be 0. And you can easily now about the intercepts. Here are the x and y intercepts, and in this budget line you can see these the meal and films, and you can draw the budget line and you can say that these are some points on the budget line, and here you can also write down the intercept here. It is useful to manipulate the equation for the budget line to obtain an alternative expression for the budget constraint in slope intercept form. If we multiply both sides of the budget line by 1 over py, we get this form. It means, first of all, you are writing the budget line and you can write down the pyy on the left side to only show the y as here, independent of all other things. The y is equals to m over py minus px over py into x. You can easily show the intercept and slope from this equation, as here the y is dependent variable and x is independent variable. Likewise, as you write down the y is equals to a minus bx. So this is a and this is b, and you can easily find out here the slope of the budget line. The consumer's budget constraint you can easily see from this diagram, and this shaded area represents the consumer's budget set or the opportunity set. So it means all the points above the budget line, those must be unaffordable, and all the points which are on the budget line, those are affordable. If the points beyond the budget line, it means those cannot be affordable, those are showing scarcity. Whenever we are explaining the concept of budget constraint, in other words, this is called economic rate of substitution. It means we are substituting one thing for another. Amount of Y the consumer is obliged to sacrifice for one extra unit of X. And this is called economic rate of substitution is equals to minus Px over Py, which is called slope of budget line. Here the m over py, this is intercept, and this is px over py, which is in minus sign. It is called slope of the budget line, and this minus sign is showing the opportunity cost or economic rate of substitution. You can see this video for the further information.
Good grammar and spelling are important, but if you want to write essays that inspire,
in this podcast, I'm going to talk about consumer theory. Again, consumer theory is really all about constrained buying. I'm going to introduce two topics: indifference curves and budget lines. An indifference curve looks something like this. And we plot quantity of good y on the y-axis and quantity of good x on the x-axis. A couple things we just need to be aware of when we talk about consumer theory, and one is the idea of transitive preferences, which means that if I prefer chicken to beans and I prefer beef to chicken, I prefer beef to beans. One thing in economics we have a hard time doing is actually putting numbers to things. I can say I prefer something more to another thing. I can say I prefer chicken more than beans, but it's hard to put an actual empirical number on that. We say that more is better, but there's also the law of diminishing marginal returns, which says as I consume more steak, I enjoy it less. With each bite of a steak I take, I enjoy the steak less and less. We often talk about utility, and by utility I mean happiness and satisfaction. This equation is read as utility is equal to the function of x and y. Utility is a function of consumption of two products, x and y. In this case, x will be potatoes and y will be steak. I've always had a hard time just talking about products x and y. And we want to maximize utility. So, imagine you have a giant steak. A friend of yours has a giant potato. You're going to trade. How do you trade? If you have a lot of steak, then you will give up steak to get some potato. Just to be clear, this represents more, this represents less, less and more. On the y-axis we have steak, and on the x-axis we have potato. If I have a lot of steak, then I'm willing to give up steak to get some potato. In fact, I'm willing to give up, in this scenario, I'm willing to give up a lot of steak to get a little bit of potato. So in this case, obviously I'm giving up more steak and getting a little bit of potato. On the other hand, if I don't have very much steak, and I'm down here at the lower part of the curve, then I'm willing to give up a little bit of steak, but I expect to get a lot of potato. As you move down the curve, notice that you actually conserve, or you conserve the thing you have the least of. So again, on good y, we have steak, and good x is potato, and we look at slopes of lines. And that's what measures the trade. Slope we call the marginal rate of substitution. It's the change in product y divided by the change in product x, which is the slope of the line. In this case, it's the change in a quantity consumed of steak divided by the change in quantity consumed of potato. Indifference curves are negatively sloped. Shows your relationship trade between two goods, in this case x and y, steak and potatoes. My budget curve, it constrains my consumption. If I don't have a budget, I can consume as much as I want. So, $5 per pound of potatoes, let's make that assumption. Let's make assumption that is $10 per pound for steak. And my income is $1,000. My equation looks something like this. $5 times the quantity of potatoes I consume, and $10 times the quantity of steak I consume, and all that adds up to my total income of $1,000. What if I spend all my income on steak? Then I cross out that amount, and I have $10 times the amount of steak, which just means I can consume 100 pounds of steak. On the other hand, what if I spend all my income on potatoes? It looks something like this, and I have 200 pounds of potatoes. A lot of potatoes. So we can plot this line. If I spend all on steak, it's 100 steak. All on potatoes is 200 potatoes. I can easily calculate the slope of the line, which is -1/2. The equation of my budget line looks something like this. The price of X times the quantity of X plus the price of Y times the quantity of Y. M, we use M instead of I. So we have income is equal to price of X times the quantity of X plus the price of Y times the quantity of Y. And now we're going to solve for Y. So we subtract the price of X times the quantity of X from both sides of the equation, which gives us income minus the price of X times the quantity of X on the left-hand side, and price of Y times the quantity of Y on the right-hand side. We divide both sides by the price of Y to isolate Y, which gives us an equation like that, and eventually we have this equation here. Again, price of X times the quantity of X plus the price of Y times quantity of Y, and all this adds up to income. Now when we plot our equation and the budget line or budget curve, this is the way our equation works. The slope of the line is the ratio of the two prices. And remember that the price of the goods we're looking at is $5 and $10. And the slope should equal 1/2, which is what we calculated before. The slope of the line is the ratio of the prices. The slope changes if the price changes. So now what happens if the price of potatoes fall? What we see is it moves like that. That means you can consume more potatoes. It rotates around that axis there. You can buy more potatoes. What happens if the price of potatoes rise? You see that you can buy less potatoes, and you pivot the other way. Buy less of all potatoes. What happens if the price of steak changes? What we see is as the price of steak goes down, you can actually buy more steak. That's if the price of steak goes down. On the other hand, if the price of steak goes up, you can buy less steak. Now the next question I have is what happens if income changes? In this case, if income goes up, the entire budget line shifts out. Right? Buy more of everything. If income goes down, you can buy less of everything. So you see an entire shift of the line. Income changes, entire budget line shifts. Income goes up, budget line shifts outward. Income goes down, budget line shifts inward. So in the end, we have constrained consumption, and we're going to draw a lot of indifference curves. That's called a indifference map. And we're going to have a budget line, and we're going to look at what happens when we combine these two together in our next class. But the key is going to be the slope of the indifference curve is going to equal the slope of the budget line.
So this was the video showing the slope of indifference curve is equals to slope of budget line. Whenever these both are equal, we will get the consumer equilibrium. So we have explained the concept of indifference, concept of budget line, and in the concept of budget line, he has also explained the concept of changes in income and changes of the prices. It's about the comparative static analysis. It means whenever you are changing the income or you are changing the prices, whether the budget line will shift or the budget line will rotate. But here is the question that to get the consumer equilibrium, we will go through this concept of indifference curve. That what is the indifference curves and what is the purpose that we are studying this. The indifference curve, this is the locus of point in commodity space or commodity bundles among which the consumer is indifferent. And it shows all the combinations of goods which gives the same level of utility. The objective of the consumer is to choose the consumption bundle that maximizes his or her utility or satisfaction. If there was no scarcity, the more is better property would imply that the consumer would want to consume bundles that contained infinite amounts of goods. However, one implication of scarcity or limitation of goods is that the consumer must select a bundle that lies inside the budget set, that is an affordable bundle. Let us combine our theory of consumer preferences with our analysis of constraints to see how the consumer goes about selecting the best affordable bundles. Regarding to the indifference curve, there is the concept of marginal rate of substitution. It means the amount of Y or any commodity like food items the consumer is willing to sacrifice in order to get one additional unit of clothes so that the consumer maintains the same level of utility. Or as consumer moves down on indifference curve, the marginal rate of substitution between x and y falls. And those the marginal rate of substitution can be shown by with the negative sign the marginal utility of y divided by marginal utility of x. This diminishing marginal rate of substitution derives from assumption of diminishing marginal utility, which implies that indifference curves are convex to origin, becoming flatter as we move to the right. It means the combination of good x and y lies on the indifference curve, and those indifference curves showing the same level of utility, which is 100. It means the consumer is indifferent, like you can see there are A and B points. and the consumer is getting the same level of utility. That's why the consumer is indifferent on both. So it means why the indifference curves are like this convex. It is because of concept of diminishing marginal utility. And these are negatively sloped because of convexity and diminishing marginal rate of substitution. Furthermore, we will explain the concept of consumer equilibrium, how they will get the consumer equilibrium. Whenever the slope of budget line will be equal to the slope of indifference curve, there will be the consumer equilibrium. Our next topic will be on properties of the indifference curve and on the consumer equilibrium. You can see this case. This is the indifference curve, and there are many points on the indifference curve, and you can see that the slope of this indifference curve that will become flatter as you move down to the indifference curve analysis. So here are the different concepts of the consumer theory that we will go through in the next video. Till now, thanks for your attention.